Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called The Dragon's Hoard, an original story written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks. Enjoy the episode. The Dragon's Hoard. Once upon a time, in a distant, misty mountain, there lived a terrible dragon. His diamond-hard scales were the red of a dying fire. His eyes were twin moons, hooked crescents that glowed unnaturally in the dark. His wings stretched wide as pirate sails, and his teeth were yellowed stalactites, all dripping drool. "I am the Lord of the Mountain," he had proclaimed on the day many years ago when he had taken over the misty peak. Everyone, hear well my name. I'm Musos the Mighty of infamous fame. Give me your gold and give me your game. Take me your treasure or burn in my flame." Hearing the dragon's terrible roar, the great city at the foot of the mountain held a meeting. They discussed a bunch of different plans, but in the end, they just couldn't agree. Many thought it would be easiest to just let the dragon have their things. Others wanted to run, but what good was running when the dragon could fly? Some small amount wanted to fight, but without the rest to help, they knew they would surely be cooked for dinner. While they were arguing over which course of action to take, Musos got impatient. The dragon roared loud enough to shake stones and send trees crashing to the ground, and flew down from his mountain. "You bicker, talk, and waste the hours. Now you'll see how fire devours." With a belching bellow, Musos blasted flame all over the farmers' fields. He baked potatoes where they lay in the earth and popped corn right off the stalk. By the time he was done, half the city's food was ruined, and the fire spread for days until it finally rained. It was enough to break their spirits. So, to make Musos the Mighty happy, they took all their gold and jewels and silver, all their cows and pigs and goats, all their little treasure and precious things, and sent them up to the dragon to hold in his mountain. When they were finished, the dragon smiled a wicked smile. "Well done with the riches, well done with the gold, and now they're mine, until I'm done and old." He was true to his word, and the thing about dragons is they live a very, very long time. The people in the city had kids, and their kids had kids, and those kids had kids, and still the dragon ruled over them in the mountain. In time, their fields started to grow once more, but the dragon always swooped down and ate the best of the crops and game, leaving very little for the people. When they complained, the dragon would say, "These are my crops, these are my fields. Be happy that I share my yields. I let you work, I let you eat, and if you argue, I'll let you be meat." The city was always on the verge of disaster, teetering between eating and starving, trying to balance like a tightrope walker. One with a very hungry dragon just below. It might have kept on that way, but one day they were hit by a terrible storm. It was a hurricane that rolled in from a distant coast. The wind roared as loudly as the dragon had all those years ago. Trees were ripped from the ground and flung like darts. Houses were chucked into the sky like a little brother destroying a toy block castle. Waters raged and flooded and swamped. And when it finally passed, the city was near ruins, and there was very little in the way of food. They could try and buy food from distant cities, but the journey was long and difficult. And besides, the dragon held all of their gold and valuables. Some declared it hopeless, packing all they owned onto their backs and hiking away for a better life. Some made it, others didn't, but the journey was impossible for the very old and the very young, so most of the families stayed, doing what they could to repair their broken homes. What they could do turned out to be very little. They needed food, they needed gold, and they needed help, which food and gold could buy them. "This is too much," said a woman named Bard, who had become an unofficial leader after the storm. "The dragon says he's in charge? Then he should help. I'm going to climb the mountain." "You can't!" cried another townsperson, who understood that Bard might provoke the dragon and make things worse. "He won't help us, and you'll only get yourself roasted and toasted and burnt to a crisp." "Well, better to be roasted than to watch my family starve," said Bard. But others disagreed, and she let the issue drop, at least in public. That night, Bard decided she would go and ask the dragon for help despite the others. It made her sad and angry to ask, since she was a proud woman. It was unfair because, after all, everything the dragon owned had once belonged to Bard's people. And worse, Bard and the others had grown the food the dragon took with their own calloused hands. But, she thought bitterly, what was pride when it came to taking care of her children? Bard wanted to fight and rage and curse, but she knew it was better that she swallow her pride so that her children could swallow some food. She set out in the dark of early morning, riding a small, sure-footed horse called a garron. They picked their way carefully up the mountain, through fire-blackened earth and strange melted stone. Bard had heard stories from her grandfather about how the mountain used to be alive with goats and eagles and tough little flowers. Now, though, nothing lived here but the dragon, and the whole misty peak stank like burned food and wet ashes. Finally, she came to the top of the trail and found the great dragon Musos the Mighty laying in the sun in front of the entrance to his cave. Behind the dragon, Bard could see what seemed to be all the treasure in the world, gleaming gallons of gold and soaring spires of silver and even towering tables of food. Bard had meant to be polite to the dragon, but seeing all that wealth, all that life-saving food just sitting there, made her angrier than ever. "Dragon!" she shouted. "There's been a storm and the city below can't survive without what you've taken from us. We need some of the treasure back so that we can rebuild and make a life for ourselves and our families." The great dragon stirred, lids opening to reveal hook-moon eyes, and there started a low rumble. For a moment, Bard thought it was a growl, but slowly she realized it was a laugh. The beast was laughing at her. "This is no joke," Bard spat. "We need help, we need food, and you're hoarding what we've grown. Come on now, be reasonable." "A little woman takes her life in her hands to come to a dragon and make such demands? All that I have was rightfully taken by fire and battle, by shattered spears shaken. You want me to give? Charities on your mind? Well, a more caring, sharing beast you'll never find. You can't have my food, you can't have my gold, or anything else that I rightfully stole. But don't you feel worried, and sweat not from strife, for Musos the Mighty will let you leave with your life." "Well, that's not enough," said Bard, trembling a bit as the dragon pushed himself up, its wings unfurling and glowing the red of a coal fire. "I've said what I've said. You can't match my brawn. Now, before I eat you, human, be gone!" He punctuated this last bit with a smoky gout of fire. Bard was forced to turn and retreat down the mountain, empty-handed, empty-stomached, and more bitter than ever before. "Well, what did you expect?" said her friend Tom that night when Bard told him the story. "You're lucky to be alive. Forget the dragon and focus on doing what we can here." "Doing what we can?" said Bard. "What can we do? All our resources, all of our most valued things, they've been taken by the beast. He's just sitting on them, doing nothing, feasting while we work and work and work." "Just forget it," Tom said, and then he changed the subject. Bard listened without really hearing anything because she couldn't just forget it. It wasn't in her nature. Her mind would go to her wife and their 3 kids, all of them too skinny. Her boy had a bad cough that just kept getting worse. There was medicine to fix it and plenty of food for everyone, but the dragon hoarded it all. Bard didn't go home that night. The thought of the dragon's hoard kept rolling around in her mind, irritating her like a pebble in her shoe. Finally, she mounted her little Garen again and once more went up to the mountain. She found the dragon napping in front of his cave, though the beast opened a giant eye when he heard Bard approaching. "You've come again? You'll never learn. Do you really wish so much to burn?" "I've come to ask for help, but less than last time. Perhaps you could share just some of the food that you have, some meat or even some seeds? Just enough to keep the children fed. We adults will fend for ourselves, but I'm here, against my own pride and better judgment, for my kids." "You come buzzing round like gnats, begging food for snot-nosed brats? Old or young is all the same, bother me and feel my flame." Musos the Mighty roared a great gout of flame, and Bard was forced to turn and run back down the mountain, the tails of her shirt smoldering and smoking. When she made it back home, things seemed more desperate than ever. Another farm had failed, flooded by the storm, the food rotting unripe on the vine. There was a great gathering in the central hall of the city, and plans on how they might survive the year were being discussed. "We need to go up the mountain," said Bard, bursting in. "We can't live starving and poor just because Musos has no conscience." "But the dragon is too strong," said someone with a shaky voice. "He has all the gold. Bard, he's in charge. What can we possibly do against such strength?" "He's too strong for any of us, that's true," said Bard. "And that's why it needs to be all of us." "We are desperate," said her friend Tom. "But are we so desperate as that?" "We are," said Bard. "I'll no longer live sleeping in the mud and feeding my children moldy corn while the dragon sleeps on gold and has mutton for breakfast. We need to go. We need to fight." The others sat and thought that over for a long while. The fires burned lower and their stomachs rumbled, and still they thought. And when dawn broke golden in the morning, it found them still thinking, waiting, planning. In the end, they were divided, much as their ancestors had been so many years ago. Half agreed with Bard. The other half, led by her friend Tom, thought it was too risky. They said it was better to live poor and starving than to die fighting a dragon. "Fine then," said Bard. "We will have to try it with half of us, and we'll have to hope it's enough." "It won't work," said Tom. "You'll throw your lives away." "Well, better to try and fail than to live in terror," Bard said, and then she turned and led her people from the hall. That day, Bard and her supporters gathered what little weapons they had. There were a few swords and shields, but most had homemade wooden spears or axes usually used for chopping wood. A handful had hunting bows, many had pitchforks, and Bard herself a tall scythe used for reaping grain. The group of them, solemn-faced men and women, made their way slowly up the mountain, timing their climb to reach the dragon at dawn. When they came to the top, they found the dragon sitting in front of his cave, treasure behind him, eyes a hateful yellow. "A crowd, I see, has come to play, but I tell you now, this is not the way. I tell you now, it's not your day. I see that you have come to slay, but what you should do is turn and pray. Pray that I forget this madness, pray that you don't come to sadness. You've asked for gold, for seeds to sow. I say again, the answer's no." "We aren't here to ask this time," said Bard, hefting her scythe. "We won't quietly starve while you sleep on a bed of treasure. We won't go hungry while you eat the fruits of our labor." The dragon laughed, an endless, mountain-shaking rumble. The crowd with Bard shrank back, terrified, and suddenly unsure about their numbers. "Surely you little gnats must see that none of you are strong as me." He stomped one giant foot and Bard's supporters staggered back a step, eyes wide and fearful. For a moment, Bard was afraid they would break and run, leaving her all alone. And then,
"That's enough,"
said a new voice. Bard turned to look and was surprised to see her friend Tom, leading all of those who had stayed behind.
"You're stronger than any of us, but you're not stronger than all of us."
"You came," said Bard.
"You were right all along," said Tom. "Sorry we took so long."
"Sorry nothing. You're here now. That's what matters." Musos the Mighty laughed again.
"Add to your numbers, see if I care.
What's a cloud of bugs to a bear?
What's a school of fish to a whale? And what's a whisper to a raging gale? I'll burn you to cinder and smash all your wagons. Death's what you get when you go against Ow!
Musos cried out in pain as Bard swung her scythe and buried it in the beast's claw. He jerked back and belched fire, eyes wide and wild with surprise. A flight of arrows, launched by old hunting bows, soared over the crowd and clicked and clacked against the dragon's scales, a few finding the softer skin around the eyes and nose and sticking like mosquitoes. "Get him!" cried Bard, raising the scythe stained with red smoking blood. The others all charged and swarmed around Musos. The dragon swiped with his claws and lashed with his tail and blew out great breaths of fire, but there were too many people. Every time he turned to look at one, a dozen others came in and hit him from behind. He roared and spun and shot fire until his lungs were raw and all he could manage was a whistling cloud of steam.
"The fire is gone," cried Tom. "Now is our chance."
A group of brave folk, led by Bard, ran up the dragon's tail and onto its back. They started to hack and jab with axes and pitchforks. Bard ran to the dragon's serpent neck and hooked her scythe around it.
"Enough!"
the dragon called suddenly, sinking to the ground, all the fight going out of him like air escaping a popped balloon.
Please, enough. I'm beaten and done. I thought a good fight would be some good fun. Never before have I felt such pain. Never before have I nearly been slain. I've never been hopeless or hungry or sick. Never felt my fire go out like a wick. I see how you feel now, to be desperate and trying. And if I said I'd do different, then I'd surely be lying."
"At long last," said Bard. "We are taking enough gold and food to repair our city. Do you understand?" The people crowded close, weapons still at the ready in case this was some dragon's trick.
"The gold is all yours, and the silver and jewels. Likewise the food and likewise the tools. You'll have all you need, and now that I understand, perhaps to say sorry I could lend a hand?"
The people were skeptical at first, but Musos actually meant it. He helped them carry all the treasure down the mountain, starting with the food. That night, they held an enormous feast, and for the first time in months, everyone went to bed warm and full. Musos burned away bad swampy water and spread seeds from high in the air, and from that day on, no one in the city went hungry ever again. The great dragon was a bully and a tyrant no more, because he had learned that he was stronger than anyone, but he wasn't a match for everyone united together. The end. Thanks for listening!